Hey guys, welcome to the video. My name's Josh, and for those of you that have been following my channel for a while now, welcome back. It's been a minute. I've been just a little bit preoccupied with Darktide.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
So today we're going to be talking about Darktide and a few of the issues that I have with the game currently. I wanted to wait a week before making this video since I was actually hoping for an update or hotfix to come through that would fix some of these issues. But at the time of making this video, we haven't received any updates to address these issues that we'll be getting into, and we haven't heard anything from Fat Shark about when they'll be looking at addressing these issues. Now, before I get into the problems I have with the game, I do want to make this clear. I do like the game, and I want the game to get better. It's got a great atmosphere, they've done a great job with the world design and just the aesthetic of everything. The music's top notch, the atmosphere's great, and the actual moment-to-moment gameplay, the combat itself is a lot of fun. But at the end of the day, this game didn't release as a finished product. A lot of the issues I have with this game will likely be fixed eventually, but again, at the time of making this video, we simply don't know when that'll be. When I was thinking about the state this game is in, I couldn't help but be reminded of a video I watched a month ago from the Act Man titled "The Problem with Live Service Games." There was a term he used in the video which really stuck with me, and I think it sings true for Darktide, and that is minimum viable product. Now, I would suggest watching that video in particular since the Act Man does a great job explaining it, but basically, minimum viable product is where game companies release a game in a bare-bones state and then add to it and update it over time. It's an increasingly common trend that we've seen from game developers these days, and it's a trend I really don't like. I believe this approach to game design ends up hurting the long-term health of the game and the community around the game, since first impressions are very important when it comes to video games. Imagine someone picking up a new video game. For them, the trailers looked really interesting, the cover art looks great, and they've done a little bit of initial research into it, and it looks like it'll be a fun game. They purchase it, boot it up, and initially they're having some fun with it, but then they start coming across crashes, bugs, optimization issues, missing features and content, and it's at this point that they'll form their opinion of the game. For some people, they'll go, wow, I had a fun time playing it, but it's not in a great state, I'll come back to it later. Or I'll keep playing and just enjoy what I have and wait for updates as I play. But there are also a lot of people that would just write off the game as shit and leave it at that and never come back to it, likely just refunding the game there and then. And for the people that chose to refund the game, their opinion is completely valid. They formed that opinion from playing the game. It's just as valid as the person that decided to put down the game and wait for updates, and just as valid as the person that decided to keep playing. And because of this minimum viable product approach, I truly believe that this is going to have an impact on player retention and the long-term size of the player base itself. So with all that said, let's get into what my issues are with the game itself. Firstly, we have the optimization issues. The game is performing quite poorly on a lot of people's systems. I've heard some people can't even get past the launcher. I myself have a RTX 3070 and the performance isn't great. There's a lot of frame drops. I've actually had to cap my frame rate at 60 since otherwise it'll skyrocket somewhere above 90 frames and then plummet somewhere below 40, which can look very jarring while you're trying to play. And with the upper limits of the graphical options in the game, I would actually be curious if there even is a system that exists out there that could actually smoothly run this game, since, at least for me, turning on ray tracing is an absolute no-go. That will tank my frame rate and it'll basically be like playing some console game with 20 FPS. Another issue facing the game is the crashes and disconnects. Now, to be fair, in recent days I have been experiencing less and less crashes and disconnects, but it is still something that comes up frequently enough to be an issue. To give you an idea of the extent of these crashes, the very first match that I joined into, the game crashed about 10 minutes in, and after I'd loaded the game back up and rejoined, I played for about 15 seconds and then it crashed again. And from there, I would be lucky if the game didn't crash or disconnect every other match. There are also supposedly bugged class features and feats. I haven't looked too closely into this myself, but for example, apparently the Zealot's Martyrdom class feature doesn't work the way that it's worded. Basically, you're supposed to gain increased power per 15 health missing, but people have tested this and it doesn't seem to actually stack for each 15 missing health. Instead, people are speculating that the tooltip is bugged and it's supposed to be for each 15% missing health, but there seems to be a little bit of an unknown there, since it's difficult to test this. Penances are also a problem in the game. The way a lot of them are designed is they actually promote an anti-teamwork playstyle. Now, for those of you that don't know, penances are basically tasks or achievements that you can complete to earn certain cosmetics. Now, I think some of these are harmless fun, like the Veterans one, where he has to kill a certain amount of enemies with a grenade throw without the grenade touching the ground, so it has to explode midair. That one's just kind of goofy fun in my opinion, but there are some pretty toxic ones out there, like the Psychers one, where they have to blow themselves up and kill at least 3 elite enemies. There's also a speedrun one for the Zealot, where they have to complete a mission within 10 minutes with only 1 wound of health for at least 75% of that mission length. These probably aren't too much of an issue if you have a full group to play with, but a lot of people don't have a full group and they just match with randoms. So when you have these players joining into a match with the sole purpose of completing these very specific niche tasks that are usually counter to effective teamwork, it can cause a lot of issues and resentment between players, since the people they're matching with are usually just going to be players who are just wanting to run through the mission and have a good time. To give you a really good example of this, there's a Penance on the Veteran that I completed. It took me a few tries, but I did get it eventually. Basically, you have to complete a mission on the 3rd difficulty or higher without taking any melee damage. Now, that might sound like a fun challenge to do on paper, but once you realise that chip damage is a thing, it became a bit of an issue, since a random enemy can just bonk you from behind and then the challenge has failed for that run. So I found the most effective way to do that penance was to put on a knife and just walk through the entire mission holding down right click, just blocking everything and dodging around constantly. This would require my teammates to pick up pretty much all the slack, since I was not shooting back enemies, since it was too risky not to have my melee weapon equipped and not be blocking. And I also wouldn't contribute to any horde fights, since it was way too risky to get into the thick of that. So I would basically just sit up the back, holding down block, feeling like a massive dickhead, and just letting my teammates do everything. And you know what? It worked. I got that penance done, but it wasn't fun for me to do, and I don't think it would have been very fun for my teammates to babysit me the whole way through that mission. Another issue I have that ties a bit in with my problem with the penances is that there's no private lobbies to join into. So at this point you are forced to play on public lobbies, which does mean that if you don't have a full group of 4 people, then there will be random people joining your squad. For me personally, this isn't a big deal since I don't mind playing with random people, but there are people out there that would prefer to play solo or just with their 1 or 2 other friends rather than dealing with other strangers. We're also missing a few weapons. On launch there was supposed to be 70 plus weapons, but currently we have 65 weapons, which include different variants of the same weapon type. And I think this really hurts the game with the replayability, and it kind of sucks for the Ogrins specifically, since they really need some more variety in their weapons. They basically have 4 melee weapon types and 5 types of ranged weapon, so 9 different weapons total. The game's also missing most of the crafting options. At this point, all we can do is increase the rarity and rating of a weapon. We currently don't have the option to use the refine item, earn blessing, or rebless options. Without these crafting options, the endgame actually becomes very grindy, repetitive, and also RNG dependent, since we don't have a way of actively re-rolling stats on a weapon. Because you might find a weapon that has great modifiers and a great roll in the damage stat, for example, but maybe it has horrible perks that just don't match the weapon, or the blessings just don't suit your playstyle. And on that note, let's actually talk about how you obtain weapons in this game. So in that previous example, let's say that the weapon is a type of lasgun that you really enjoy. It has great modifiers, deals excellent damage, but just the perks and blessings don't really match the playstyle that you like. So what do? How do you get a lasgun that does have good modifiers, the perks, and the blessings that you like? So at the moment, there's 3 ways, and unfortunately they're all RNG dependent. So the first way is to check the armory store. This is probably the most reliable way, but it has its problems. So once every hour, the store refreshes and you get a new list of weapons and curios available. The problem is that not every type of weapon is available on the reset, so it might actually be some time before you see a lasgun pop up, let alone one that actually has good modifiers. And on top of that, it could be a blue item that already has perks and blessings, and you might be in the same boat with perks and blessings that you don't want for the lasgun. But for the sake of argument, let's say you do find a lasgun with a high rating. You can take that lasgun to the AdMech lady, and you'll be able to consecrate it to increase its rarity, effectively adding perks and blessings onto the weapon, also increasing its total rating. But because you don't get to select the perks or blessings, and again you can't re-roll them either, so you could end up in the exact same situation with perks and blessings that you just don't want on the lasgun. The other way of obtaining high-end gear is by purchasing it from Sire Melk with your contract currency. Now, while this store does generally stock only high-end items, and you can view the perks and blessings before purchasing, it only stocks a few items at a time, and the store only refreshes once per day. So it does still have the issue of it being RNG dependent, because you could go days and days without seeing the weapon that you want. The other way of getting items is through the Emperor's Gift system, which is where you'll sometimes receive an item upon completing a mission. So whether or not you get an Emperor's Gift is RNG, what you get is RNG, and the perks and blessings on the item that you may get is also RNG. So I do consider the Emperor's Gift system to be the least reliable way of getting gear. But to be fair, either I've been very lucky recently, or Fat Shark have gone through and changed the frequency of the Emperor's Gifts. Since back in the early access beta, it felt like you'd maybe get an Emperor's Gift every 1 in 10 games, and even then it might just be a white item and complete trash. But recently I've found that I've been getting Emperor's Gifts much more frequently, probably 1 in every 4 games, and the items I've been getting have usually been blue rarity or higher, and the rating is usually quite high on them as well. So because all the methods of getting gear are RNG dependent, this means that putting together builds based on blessings and perks just isn't really an option right now. You basically just have to make do with whatever you have. This is particularly painful when you're leveling up a Psyker, since their playstyle actually completely changes once they get access to a staff. But I've heard stories of people leveling Psykers and not even seeing a staff until they're past level 20. And just as a side note, it does take a fair while to actually level up to level 30. I didn't time myself to see how long it took me to level up, but from what I could tell online, most people were hitting max level in about 15 to 30 hours. So I've got to say, if you have to put 10 plus hours into a class before you even get to experience how they're supposed to be played, I just don't think it's a good new player experience. And when you combine this with the fact that resources are locked to the character you're playing and aren't actually shared account-wide, I just come to the conclusion that I don't think this game respects the player's time. On the bug side of things, I think there are a few issues separate from the crashes that leave a bit of a negative impact on the game. The first is when you spawn into a mission, sometimes you'll just fall through the map and die straight away. It happens quite rarely, but it is something I've personally experienced, and there's a few clips online about it. There's also the issue with enemy spawns being a bit wonky. Sometimes they'll just spawn right behind you or just pop in out of thin air. And there's also a bit of an issue with hit registration. Now, this works fine 99% of the time, but if you've played veteran enough, specifically with a semi-auto gun, you probably have noticed some very wonky stuff. Like, sometimes you'll shoot an enemy in the head, the headshot noise will go off, and the hit just doesn't register. Sometimes you shoot and the animation and sound go off, but there's no hit registration and the ammo isn't spent. Almost like the shot just didn't happen. Now, that last one could just be my shitty Australian internet, but it is an issue that I have noticed in the game. Another bug I've noticed as well, which unfortunately does end up wasting the player's time a bit, is sometimes the contracts are bugged and just don't update. So, for example, you might have one where you're required to do side objectives like gather tomes or grims or get a certain amount of ranged kills, and it just doesn't update or progress. For tomes and grims specifically, I've noticed that if I don't personally grab one, it doesn't seem to progress the contract. And it really doesn't feel good when you've gone out of your way to specifically do those side objectives for a few matches in a row, only to go back to the hub and find out that the time you just spent was basically wasted. There's also the issue with the story of the game. Vermintide was also pretty light on the story, but it was there if you could put the pieces together. Everything up to the I Am a Warrior cutscene where you meet Grendel is great in my opinion, but every cutscene beyond that can just be boiled down to good job out there, but we still don't trust you, go do more work. And story spoilers ahead for those of you that haven't gotten to level 30 yet, but honestly, I use spoiler pretty lightly since there's hardly a story here, but partway through leveling up, it's revealed that there's a traitor aboard the ship, and Interrogator Rannick is investigating who it is, and you're one of his suspects. It turns out the traitor is literally some random NPC. She doesn't have a name, she never says a word, and while yes, you can see her walking around in a few cutscenes, and acting a bit sus in one in particular, it was a literally who moment. I actually thought the traitor plot hook was interesting at first, and thought it was going to be a setup for a future antagonist or boss fight, but no, it was literally just some random NPC who doesn't say or do anything and gets shot. GG no re. That's the story. There's also another aspect to Darktide's storytelling, which, while I think it's okay, it does seem to be a definite step down from Vermintide, and that's the character banter. There are some positives to going down the route of character creation, and I think they have done a good job with the personalities we can choose from, but there's just a certain charm that Vermintide had with its banter that seems to be lacking here, like the camaraderie between the different characters and the little pieces of backstory that were revealed through the banter. But that said, this is a fairly subjective take, and I definitely don't expect everyone to agree with me on this one. Also, I did touch on this before, but there is a big story aspect that we're missing from Darktide, and that's having an antagonist. In Vermintide 1 we had the Greyseer, in Vermintide 2 we had Rashknit, or Rakšnit, how the fuck do you pronounce that one?
Wrong! Rashknit and you!
But in Darktide, we don't have anyone in particular. I mean, there's the Chaos guy in the jail cell across from us in the intro cinematic, and maybe he'll show up again in the future, who knows, but for now we simply don't have an antagonist in the game. Another aspect that I have a few critiques for are the maps or levels themselves. Basically, they all feel the same, or at least a lot of them do, In fact, there are several maps which share the exact same sections but just end up leading off to a different path or building. I don't necessarily mind this, but it does lead to a few maps feeling and looking very similar. Now, this might just be me having a really trash memory, but I would really struggle to name or describe more than half of the maps off the top of my head. There just seems to be this lack of variety to really make them feel distinct from one another. I also have an issue with the hub itself. It feels very lifeless. I'm just not really a fan of it, since in Vermintide 1 we had the Red Moon Inn, which for me felt very cozy and it was a nice place to relax in between missions. And in Vermintide 2 we had the Keep. For both Vermintide 1 and 2, you were in a first-person perspective, had your weapon out, and you had a few things that you could interact with within these areas. For Vermintide 1, I do remember that you could actually drink and get into a drunken fist fight with some of your friends. And in Vermintide 2, you do have the training dummies, and there's also some jumping puzzles around the keep, which, at least for me, were a lot of fun when I was waiting in between missions. Another example of a game that does an excellent job with their hub is Deep Rock Galactic. It has some mini-games, a few things that you can interact with, and it's just a fun place to goof around in with your friends. And at least for me, this just adds so much to the experience. But in Darktide, you're locked into this third-person perspective, and you're unable to jump or interact with anything outside of the shops, and it just feels like this was only added to try and drive cosmetic sales. My final critique that I'll be making is in relation to the class variety that we have in the game. Now, if you've checked the Darktide subreddit at any time in the past month, you've probably seen this repeated hundreds of times, but I still think it's a valid point. So in Vermintide 2, we had 5 characters, each with 3 of their own subclasses. So basically we had 15 classes each. Now, each of those 15 have pretty much the exact same level of customization as what we have for our characters in Darktide, and we only have 4 classes in Darktide. I remember hearing earlier in Darktide's development that Fatshark found that the subclass system from Vermintide 2 was a bit of a crutch, and they wanted a more open customization system. This sounded really cool to me. Now, they never did explain exactly what this open customization system was, but I kind of pictured that maybe we had this massive pool of feats that we could choose from and kind of create these really unique builds with. So for me, that sounded really cool. But as the development went on, they seem to have gone back on this and just reverted to the subclass system from Vermintide 2. Now, I like to give the benefit of the doubt in most cases when I think someone's dropped the ball, so I would like to assume that they just couldn't get this open system to work properly. Whether it was bugged or completely unbalanced, who knows, and just decided to go back with what they knew for the Vermintide 2 subclasses. However, in 2021, Tencent did acquire majority control of Fatshark, so I have a bit of a conspiracy theory. If you're at all familiar with Tencent, you'll probably know that they're quite aggressive with their monetization strategies, so I have the theory that it's possible that the devs were forced by shareholders to further monetize the game beyond cosmetics, and this led them to the decision to scrap this open system and instead just give 4 specific classes which were possibly created from this open system and with restricted customization options, then sell us additional classes as DLC post-launch. In any case, with there only being 4 classes, a restrictive build system, and fairly limited weapon variety, I think there's a replayability issue at the moment. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, the game is still a lot of fun to play, but let's just quickly go through all the areas that can be improved upon for the game. Some of these are easier said than done, but they should be mentioned nonetheless. So, firstly, they really need to fix the optimization, the crashes, the disconnects, and just in general iron out a few of the bugs that are in the game. They really need to add the rest of the crafting systems so that we actually have something to do at the end game. They need to add private lobbies so we're not dealing with people trying to do penances and honestly just pissing off the rest of their team. They also need to either change penances to be more team focused, which they did make them a little bit easier to be fair on them, but they are still fairly toxic, some of them, like the Psycho blowing themselves up to try and kill elites. And the same goes for any penances that they may add in the future. I would really like to see more team-oriented ones, and especially ones that help people improve their actual playstyle. For the weapon shop, I would like to see a much larger selection available on rotation, or better yet, give us categories of each weapon type. For example, there would be a category for infantry autoguns, and a category for revolvers and shotguns and las guns, and the RNG selection just resets each of those categories each hour, so you'll just get a different list of infantry autoguns in that particular category. This would help remove the issue of never finding a particular weapon type that you want on the rotation. They really need to fix the bug with contracts so that they actually update correctly and you're able to progress towards completing them. And I think they should allow for more than 4 rerolls on the contracts. It does genuinely suck when you get stuck with contracts that you don't like just because of bad RNG. They should also make resources and possibly the contracts themselves account-wide, with maybe having simpler daily contracts tied to the characters specifically. I'd also like to see some more diverse maps, since again a lot of them currently feel very samey. Some of the voice lines have mentioned that there's another hive city on the Toma, so I think that even in the setting, there is variety to be had here. They should also introduce an antagonist in a mission, and possibly have them foil our plans multiple times on different missions, and then have it pay off in a cool boss fight in a later mission. They also need to add more weapons, since this will help with the immediate replayability of the game, and also work on adding more classes. I believe that Shark said they were aiming to release new classes every 2 to 3 months after launch, so hopefully we'll have more class variety and replayability in general just a bit down the track. Before I close this video off, I do want to reiterate that I don't mean this to come off as overly negative. I do honestly enjoy the game, it's been a lot of fun, but with the missing features and other issues that I've gone over, I don't think the game released in a good state. I think it needed just a bit more time in the oven, and I would personally treat what we have right now as more of an early access rather than a full release. So with that said, if you haven't bought the game yet and you see this video, I would caution you to wait a little while. I suspect in the next 6 to 12 months from now, most of what I've critiqued will be ironed out, but we will just have to wait and see. Now, I expect this video might come off as a bit controversial, so whether you agree or disagree with what I've said, honestly sound off in the comments. I do want to hear what you think about the game as well, and I do believe it's healthy for a game community to have diverse opinions on the game, rather than just everyone being a yes man or everyone just dogpiling on it. I also do want to mention that this video doesn't mean that I'll stop doing Darktide content. I do still want to keep covering Darktide, and I'll actually be revisiting some of my class overviews since there have been several changes to the class feats since I made those videos. But yeah, that covers everything I wanted to talk about today. Remember to like, comment and subscribe. I'm currently aiming to reach 1,000 subscribers, so if you like my content, I would really appreciate the subscription as a new channel. Anyway, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.